Vijay Tirathrai is the managing director of Techstars, based out of Dubai. And it's our pleasure to have him over at NICL and talk to us. So thank you, Vijay, again. I wanted to start by asking you about your journey and what got you into entrepreneurship, and what are you doing these days at Techstars?
Right, that's a loaded question.
Yeah.
A very good morning and assalamu alaikum. And it's such a, if I may say, it's such an honor to be here at LUMS, as particularly in this innovation center, which I had a quick tour before settling down. And one word, I'm inspired. So it's really great to be here this morning. When I think about entrepreneurship, I think of it as, one that wants to change the world, right? And that we have this innate hunger or thirst to do something different for mankind. And that's, for me, is entrepreneurship, is identifying a problem. I'm using problem not necessarily in a negative way, but it's about thinking about opportunities to solve in a marketplace. And so the role of the entrepreneur really is to have clarity and insights about that problem, and then find a way to get a solution, to get a product out into the marketplace. And in doing that, in pursuit of that journey, it's all about risk-taking. And that makes the entrepreneur a really, really special breed of people. I started my journey at the age of 12. I was very blessed with coming through a family business that had a long heritage in being in business. I guess business was in our bloodlines. And started in the shop floor, in the retail setting, learning about serving about customers and presenting merchandise, and then moving on to sourcing and product development. But the whole experience has just been wonderful to see the end-to-end journey from sourcing a product, packaging it, branding it, marketing it, and then serving the customer on the shop floor. And that was my very early experience as a child and early on in my teens working in the family business. And fast forward, one of the great influences in my life was my father, such an inspirational man. And he always tells me, he says, you have to be self-made. And I didn't know what self-made is until I had the entrepreneurial bug to do it on my own. And so at the age of 26, I started my first venture, which is manufacturing and distribution of safety helmets for bike riders. So if you're a cyclist out there, you understand what I'm talking about. And so I was an avid cyclist, and I thought, this is a product that I want to build. And so that's how I got into entrepreneurship at a very early age.
And I think that's a absolutely beautiful story, because it touches upon, the need to really understand commerce or business in general before, bringing an idea or solving a problem. So where are you today with Techstars, and what drives you, what inspires you today to do what you're doing?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. My friends and people I've grown up were surprised that I've given up building companies, which I've been doing for the last 30, 35 years, to what I'm doing today, which is being an investor. And it's a really different shift in terms of mindset. And starting from an entrepreneur investor has really a different characteristics. For one, I think I get to a point in my life, having built 7 businesses, having scaled many of them, and many of them are spectacular failures, I would say. But all in all, as a composite, if I look at the picture, it's given me a lot of insights, a lot of learning opportunities. And then I asked myself, what do I do in my next half of my life? How do I capitalize that? And I figured that being an investor, it's a great way to channel all that experience and energy and give back to the community. And so, not realizing this, but I've set myself a mission 25 years ago, that is to help entrepreneurs succeed. So that's become my life mission. And I've been involved in entrepreneurship for the last 20, 25 years in various organizations and initiatives. But today, as an investor in my current role as the managing director at Techstars, is I have a privilege to not just give advice, but actually have skin in the game by taking risks, investing dollars into companies. And that changes the dynamics a little bit. It's just not giving time for charity, but really taking ownership of those decisions and backing those decisions with your reputation, i.e. my reputation and credibility. So I think that's really interesting what I'm doing, and that's really exciting for me at least, why I do what I do today, which is investing in early stage technology companies.
So I remember in our chat yesterday, you mentioned about operating primarily in the MENA region, but globally otherwise as well. And I'm sure this is also a loaded question, but can you share some of the common traits that you've seen of successful entrepreneurs? What across regions? What are some of the things that make them successful?
Yes. So I focus on emerging markets, namely in the Middle East, North Africa, Turkey, Pakistan, India, and part of Sub-Saharan Africa. But the question that you asked about when you look at entrepreneurs and what are the characteristics, I dare say that it's pretty universal. It's not confined to any geographies. And so the things that come to mind when I look towards investing in entrepreneurs, what I think would be a successful entrepreneur, is fundamentally that they have an obsession on solving a problem. And if I can see in the eyes the twinkle, fairy eyes, they want to solve this problem, they want to go deep, they're willing to risk, as they say, the farm, putting a house on mortgage, just to solve that problem, I know intuitively there is something there to bet on. And so I think I'm looking for evidence that they have the obsession around solving a problem, backed by some degree of insights. And maybe as a segue, they don't need to have commercial experience, just to be clear. They don't need an MBA or a PhD or anything. They really need to have a clarity of understanding of what the problem set is and the desire to solve it. So for me, that's number one. Number two is that, I don't know whether the audience will know when I use the word hustle. And really, the great entrepreneurs are great hustlers. They don't take no for an answer. They just know how to get stuff done. And within 24 hours, they can outperform the average man on the street because they just got a way to engage with people. They are able to make the calls. They're not afraid to get a no for an answer. So being a great hustler is a great trait to see. And I guess last but not least, that the tenacity and the perseverance to see through an idea. Because really, entrepreneurship or the entrepreneurial journey is fraught with danger, risks, and pitfalls. And often people do give up along the way. It could be for practical reasons, it's not working out. It could be for financial reasons, it's not working out. But to have the perseverance and tenacity to see it through, it's something that only a very few select can do that in these challenging journey. So those, for me, would be the top three traits that I look for when making a decision to invest in an entrepreneur.
And when we talk about these traits, we talked a lot about the personality of the entrepreneur, their tenacity and willingness to see things through. How do you weigh the idea or the problem that they're trying to solve, is that something that goes hand in hand? Is it one without the other, or is it the complete package?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think typically we say, we hear often that the idea has to be phenomenal. And if I were to say there are 5 things or 6 things that we should think about, or at least what I think about from an investor's mindset, idea probably ranks number 4.
Okay.
In that hierarchy of consideration. The first is the caliber of the team. The second is the caliber of the team. The third is the caliber of the team.
Yeah.
And so I'm always indexing the team here, only because that's really the key differentiator, particularly for early stage companies. Put this in context. If you're investing in, say, a Fortune 500 company listed with traction, you can really analyze a lot of data points from EBITDA, profitability, where the revenue is coming from, the most desired product, for example, the iPhone 15. But when you're a startup, you don't have all those data points to assess. So your fallback position is non-financial. It's really about the ability of the team to execute that vision. And so you tend to look at what's been their life experiences. Have they dealt with challenges? Have they done a failed startup, for example? And if there are 3 co-founders in the team, how do they complement each other from a technical expertise to marketing to the ability to do sales? And how does that come together? The dynamics and the alignment as a team. So there is an over-indexing, of course, with the team. So team. Then I would say that really, if someone's thinking about launching a business, how large is the addressable market? Because if the market is not really large enough, particularly from venture funding, where you're going to get capital to back those companies, then it might not seem to be so exciting, right? So the addressable market has to be broad and deep enough for the companies to have room to grow that can attract capital to be investing in. So that will come next. And then after that is, if you're at a very early stage in the process, is how do we look at traction and how fast you can develop those tractions. So for example, if you're yet to launch, but are you able to maybe have some proof of concept done, prototyping done, and all this will support the evidence that this team has ability to execute if it's pre-revenue. And if it's post-revenue, then you're looking for your ability to spend on, say, acquisition and customers and how you're able to strategize in that. So these are all evidence. And finally, the bad news for some people is the idea. The idea actually for me ranks pretty low in the hierarchy of things. So that would be the way in which I would evaluate companies to invest in.
So I think picking up from that, what is the role of the investor, especially pre-seed, if you're saying that the idea is second to the team and the desire to solve problems? What roles have you seen where, in your experience, where the idea has perhaps shifted from where it started and became a success?
The role of the investor is massive, particularly for an early stage. I'll give you a few examples. I think, so at the early stage, the idea is still very raw. And the entrepreneur at that stage is really making a lot of hypotheses about the value proposition. So about the market, assumptions about the market, assumptions about the customer, assumptions about the pricing of the product or intended product to be launched, assumptions about the engineering of the product. All these things are not fully tested or validated. So having early investors that really doubles up as a board of advisors or mentors, if you like to say that, is crucial at early stage for them to get the validation or invalidation needed to really put your energy and focus and resources in the right directions. Often, entrepreneurs really go onto a journey, they say, getting down to a rabbit hole with no results. And so to avoid that, you really need some great advisors around you. So the role of the investor plays a significant, makes a significant contribution. I would say that if I can plug in here and talk about Techstars, the organization that we work with. So one of the things that we are very proud about over the last 20 years is we have developed a model in which these programs that we run for our founders is a transformative experience in which they get access to a pool of 60 to 100 mentors within a short space of time. And the idea there is just that, is that they're able to test out those hypotheses early on so they don't make fundamental mistakes in investing in a product that should not be out there in the market, for example. So the program actually allows for mistakes to be learned and quick iterations based on market feedback from the extensive range of mentors that these companies have. So I think the role of early investors is crucial. If someone's raising here, should really consider about fundraising not as transactional, number one. What I mean by that, it should be relational. It should be a relationship with your investors. It should be a question about what value can you add, as opposed to give me $100,000, but what value can you add to my journey? That should be a crucial question that the founder should ask. And so, and for early investors to then say, they're taking a lot of risks, but they should have skin in the game to say, I'm willing to open up my network. I'm willing to be able to offer you office hours to provide feedback on a regular basis. Otherwise, don't invest, because you're not going to add much value beyond just writing a check.
That's, and so we talked about addressable market size, especially when it comes to VCs and making it interesting, exciting. I think from our perspective, being in Pakistan, I want to ask this question that what is the balance between solving local problems versus global problems in an era where we are talking about, a lot of the startups are tech-based startups, and technology to a large extent transcends borders?
That's a great question. I think you might get two different answers from me depending on the day. But let me try this, because I think it's unique to Pakistan. So generally speaking, when I look at a proposition by a founder pitching me, the first tendency is to look whether this product can scale globally. That would be my bias. And the simple reason is because it has scalability on a global level. Then it's going to attract a lot more funding. It's got more propensity for growth, more revenues. Very simple to make that argument. But there's something to be said in emerging markets, such as Pakistan, Indonesia, Egypt, which has unique challenges in the devoid of, say, infrastructure, first-class infrastructure, utilities, distribution channels. Perhaps bureaucracy, red tape has been the norm. And so I see it quite differently, in which an entrepreneur in Pakistan could justify that focusing on emerging markets, say a home ground being Pakistan itself, has potential to be a highly valuable company. It's not easy, as I said, or not easy to execute, but there is a strong thesis for that. What I've noticed is that, particularly here, in the last decade, there's been a lot of investment in infrastructure with utilities, the adoption of mobile phone, internet connectivity, and also the access to the global network in terms of software and other available technologies such as AI for founders to leverage on. And it changes the dynamics of the proposition today, that you don't need to necessarily have to look to the United States as a marketplace to launch a product. If there's a way that you can leverage around this collusion of emerging technologies and then use as a use case for Pakistan, there's great justification that it can be a valuable company. I've just read recently that that the transaction value per capita and the number of transactions on e-commerce is right now in the cups of a hockey stick growth in Pakistan.
Yep.
In spite of the, should I say, challenging environment that we are now facing today in the country. But in spite of that, I can guarantee you that it's just going to grow exponentially. And for me, if you're thinking about launching a company today, it is the best time to launch a company because the adoption rate of users and the user base is just going to be huge, not in terms of the number of transactions, but also the value is going to grow, at least on the rupee level. It's going to grow significantly. So if you figure out that and you can capitalize that as part of a product or solution, I think that's truly exciting. And something I would be seriously consider to invest in those companies.
So I think that leads me into the next question, which is, as the organization that you're managing, Techstars, how do you evaluate different geographies? Or talking about third world economies like Indonesia, Egypt, what is the ecosystem that you look at before you think about entering into a region?
So that's a really great phrase you use, ecosystem. I think when we look at companies, first and foremost, we don't filter them by geographies. We really go back to the fundamentals, which is we say how great the team is, what are they trying to solve, in which marketplace. So we don't discriminate by geographies, but as long as we have convincing and compelling argument that the addressable market is large enough, backed by a great team, clear execution plan, we're going to back the company. But specific to your question about how these geographies matter, I was largely raised in the Far East, but I have global experience operating in North America, in Europe, and elsewhere in conducting business. I do see there is an arbitrage opportunity to take advantage of the emerging markets. It's pretty clear that this region in particular, the Indian subcontinent, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, are going to be fastest growing economies in this decade, fueled by basically the demographics, but also is now in an inflection point where a lot of investments made in infrastructure is really coming into at scale in terms of impacting the population base. So this is where tech companies can take advantage on basically building a layer above the infrastructure. And so when I look at the opportunities, should I invest in companies in Europe or North America, me personally, I made a conscious decision to focus on the emerging markets because I think I understand it better. And I can relate to several growth stories I've seen across the world that has repeated patterns of growth. I was just reminded this morning when I met with the dean that when the decision of this campus was selected, it was somewhere outside Lahore, right, in the middle of nowhere. But today it's considered in the heart of Lahore, which is pretty interesting, in the short space of 30 years. Imagine what's going to happen in the next 30 years. I remember my first visit in Pakistan was 23 years ago. Population of Pakistan circa 120 million, I think.
Wow, we've doubled.
We doubled. It doubled less than 20 years, in 2 decades. Imagine what's going to happen in 20 years. Yeah. So if you have a sense of numbers, you have a sense of the day-to-day or the year-to-year delta in terms of change, you can feel that there is a lot of opportunities. And this is really the truly exciting thing for me to be here in Pakistan because I understand that this is going to happen.
So what are some of the interesting technologies or in particular verticals that you're seeing that are attracting funding and even founder interest in terms of solving problems right now?
You're talking about today?
Yeah.
Let me preface that by saying, some of you may already know this, that the tech/venture capital industry is going through a bit of a funding winter. Yeah. So capital deployment is dramatically down compared to 12 months ago. We've just come up from one of the most historic booms over the last decade in terms of funding, both in terms of number of transactions, as well as valuations, as well as the amount of dry powder that's been deployed. And rule of thumb, over the last 12 months, we've seen about a 60% drop. That's pretty significant. What's the meaning of that is that a lot of companies who are in the midst of fundraising are going to be caught on the wrong foot. And so we're going to see companies not getting the cash they needed, so they're going to scale back, worst case, close down. Companies who are able to close are likely to close at a lower valuation. So there's going to be a lot of pain and hurt in the process. The flip side of this, that's the optimist in me, is that again, driven by two factors: demographics in emerging markets, and the appetite for change, and second by the first 30 years of infrastructure through technology, whether it's the internet, the Web 2.0, the fintech layers, the interconnectivity of several industries, open APIs, is really opening up a lot of opportunities for tech companies today. And I will double down on this, that today is the best time to start and launch a business. Funding may be a challenge, but it's the best time to launch a business. In fact, at Techstars, you'd be surprised, Ahmed, that we get about 50 to 60,000 applications a year, companies applying for funding. And that has doubled from last year. And it's doubled from the previous year. And we think that is going to continue. And it's driven because we know that there's such a growing appetite of companies launching businesses. And they know that we can actually help them scale those companies. So I'm very optimistic that actually the future looks pretty bright. If you have a 10-year horizon in terms of the funding cycle, that this low point in the funding winters we're going through right now will even out and will scale. But really what it does, it disciplines the market to bring the stronger companies out, and the weaker companies are weeded out in the process. And then also the questions that we get to ask the founders today is somewhat more different. Earlier, 2 years ago, I know a lot of, I won't mention names, but I know a lot of VCs will be in a hurry to write checks because of FOMO. I don't want to miss out on this opportunity because I know the valuations are going to go up to make a quick buck. But today the conversation is very different. It's about demonstrate your path to revenue or path to profitability. Yeah. What is the sustainable moat that you can build around your business so that I know that even though there is going to be a funding drought over the next 3 years, you can self-sustain in that environment.
I have to ask, if you can share some stories of successful startups that you've mentored, some exciting new ideas, or even, I think it's important to talk about ideas that may not sound too exciting, but are very successful.
Yeah, so I have many examples, and it's almost like asking your favorite child. Oh, who do you pick? Actually, I'm going to be a little biased here because right in front of me, I have a company that we've invested in, Zoe, who's co-founded Jalebi. Zoe, can I invite you to say a couple of quick words about yourself and your journey?
Sure. Assalamualaikum everyone, good morning. I'll just stand over here. My name is Zohair Heather. I'm originally from Islamabad. I'm living in Dubai now for about 12 years. Corporate professional for a very long time, dreaming entrepreneur for a longer part of that. Started my first venture in 2005 after returning from the States after doing my undergrad. And that was a catastrophic failure, but it led me to a lot of other opportunities I bootstrapped my second company, which was a digital agency my wife and I ran for about 8 years. And then about 2.5 years ago, I started Jalebi with two fantastic co-founders, one of whom is based in Lahore and the other one in Dubai with me. And we spent about 18 months slugging it out, trying to figure out what we needed to do to be investable and build a business that would actually find some kind of legs. 18 months into the journey, we started to figure out what we wanted to do, but the model didn't really matter. And Vijay and I had known each other for a few years before that. So I'd been using that time to cultivate and build a relationship. We'd actually applied to Techstars at the very beginning of our journey and famously got rejected, which was a great opportunity for us because I think, what Vijay talked about, tenacity, it's a very important trait that people often misunderstand. It's not to be confused with stubbornness, because the ability to have a very fixed idea about what you want to do without the idea itself being the blinding sort of light, the pivot or the opportunity to be agile is really important. And I think through that course, we taught ourselves and we learned about how flexible we need to be. So Vijay, when he took a bet on us the second time around, this was actually the right time for us, as we were actually at the right place on our journey to be able to kind of go through an accelerator. It's life altering. I had a kid, I'm over 40, I'm set in my ways. And so for me to go through an accelerator at that time, where most of the class is in their early 30s, it's very different, right? I have different obligations and responsibilities in life. But I think that the opportunity for us to be vulnerable is phenomenal. The ability for us to be open-minded about taking in new ideas at different stages in life. When we got invested, we were able to then open doors and get other investors to come on board. And today, our cap table, or capitalization table, for those who don't know what a cap table is, consists of some of the most important investors in the region. We have mostly a lot of Saudi investors actually, and that thanks to the program that we were part of, which was based out of Riyadh. And we have a large number, almost 80% of our investor base out of 30 investors are actually Saudis. And as you know, Saudi Arabia is really kind of pushing their agenda to kind of become more global. And so that really puts us in a great place because we have our engineering team based in Pakistan. So we're able to kind of bring that bit together. So, that's I guess, a short history.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, thank you, sir. That's very kind of you to share. Didn't mean to put you on the spot. But, in all honesty, Zoe is a classic example of entrepreneurs that we back and we believe. At the point when he applied, he didn't have a product. He didn't have a single customer. But he and his co-founders came from varied backgrounds, had been part of other successes, some well-known entities in the region. And his serial entrepreneur journey itself is a testament to, I've got those battle scars on my back to say we can fight this out. But 2 years out, successful in raising $1 million, have got traction in Saudi Arabia, traction in the UAE. We see typical of our companies doing this in our portfolio. Of course, we do have out of the 4,000 companies we've invested, 40 of them have reached unicorn status with $1 billion revenue and above. One company in particular, which might be well known, is SendGrid, which is the world's largest email delivery company. They take care of about 80% of all emails that's been delivered by banks, insurance companies, Amazon, Meta, and so on. And within the space of 7 years going through our program, they've IPO'd at a valuation of $1.5 billion. We have many of these examples. But I think success is not so much about reaching a valuation of $1 billion. Success is really about, how do you get from launch, which is an idea, to product market fit. That 0 to 1 stage, as opposed to 1 to 100, is the most difficult. And this is where we participate in that journey as a founder to help them navigate that 0 to 1. Because you can get through 0 to 1, you can figure the rest one out. And this has been a joy working with founders like Zohair.
I think that's a beautiful thought. And with that, before we close, what else would you like to share with the community here? We've got, budding entrepreneurs, people who are thinking about entering this space. Can you share some thoughts with them?
Yeah, I think, I had the pleasure of working with a lot of Pakistani individuals in the diaspora around the world. Zoe is a good example of that. It is my mission here to connect with the community and to build those relationships with the entrepreneurs, the investment community being VCs, angels, as well as the enablers such as this esteemed university that's churning out students in science and technology. And so the advice I would give is that, Pakistan has a very promising future and a phenomenal demographics in its favor. What needs to be done by way of investment and development is building up the ecosystem. And the ecosystem comprised of various stakeholders, being the investment community, the entrepreneurs, the academia. I was really blown away this morning, learned that 45% of the students in this Lumps University are female. That's pretty extraordinary. And in science and technology, it's about a third. That's even very impressive. And I think, just to segue a little bit, less than 2% of startups or tech companies that are founded are female-led. Just 2%. That's an incredibly low number. And at least at Techstars, and me myself, is very passionate about changing those statistics in favor of having more female-led founders. In my recent program in Saudi Arabia, which we just made an investment for 12 companies back in June, 50%, wow, that's 1 in 2, are female-led CEOs. And so what I believe is the case is that there is talent everywhere, but access is not equal. So talent is everywhere, but access is not equal. It starts with the universities, it starts with education, getting them into the science stream, giving them those opportunities and access to education, and then into the job markets, getting the experience, and then onto entrepreneurship, and then getting the ecosystem support and back, funding those companies led by female entrepreneurs. That access to that talent, a lot of work has to be done. But I do believe fundamentally the talent is there everywhere. So I think back to the question about what I would advise as a community is really more collaboration, more interaction with the stakeholders to really nurture the ecosystem here in Pakistan so it can be self-sustaining and flourish. No longer we should be thinking about, if I have a startup idea, I should go to Silicon Valley and start raising. That's an old idea. That's old school. Really, there's enough capacity within an ecosystem in Pakistan to really tap into, but what's really missing is the connective tissue to bring everything together. And I think we can just work on that and have the confidence that this is really going to pull a lot of synergies and therefore producing great entrepreneurs like Zohe and many others who've come through this route over the last decade. And by the way, I would say that the ecosystem here is still very nascent. It's been about a decade where you begin to see some e-commerce and tech entrepreneurs. Many of them actually started their success in the Bay Area, but it's really now that we're seeing traction taking place in the marketplace. So my last piece of advice is that if you're thinking of starting a business, you're so lucky, because when I started my first business in 95, 94, I didn't have an ecosystem. It was basically you're pretty much on your own, you're relying on a family network or a handful of friends. But today, you walk to any tech hub, everyone's very open, everyone's willing to give and support. That's pretty extraordinary. And so I would encourage you to participate in the realm of innovation and changing the world for a better place.
Thank you so much for sharing these inspiring thoughts. And before we close, I would like to open up for questions from the audience. So before you ask your question, small request, please give a brief introduction. Yes, please.
So it's Hassan Mubarak here. I am representing cultivate. We are a buy now, pay later startup out of Lahore. So my question is basically, one of the biggest challenges startups face is when they actually start to scale, they're lucky enough, they actually start the transition phase from becoming, remaining a startup to actually becoming a small scale business, which means that lots of liberties that entrepreneurs have or their core team members have in terms of relying on the hunch perhaps and taking all those challenges and opportunities that otherwise in a more structured environment you need proper departments for, or different specific individuals that running those verticals perhaps, that actually liberty is compromised. So because you invest in so many early stage startups and you are vested in them, so how do you mentor them in this transition phase from remaining a startup even if they are no longer a startup anymore?
That's a great question, Hassan. Thank you very much. I don't see it as an issue of liberty. The way I think about it is as follows. I think when you are the entrepreneur with the ideation in your mind, it's going to be largely driven by gut feel and intuition. But as you scale your business, then there's a evolution or transition into what I would call fact-based or data-driven decision making. And I think that what may have carried you in your journey successfully as an entrepreneur, say from the 0 to 1, but from the 1 to 10 stage, you have to make very quick transition into building data points or metrics that's going to support your decision making. And in failure doing that, you're doing a disservice to your business. And so it's not about liberty, it's more about where do you shift your thought process around from basically general observation from your 6 senses to making a lot of decisions based on data. And I think the emphasis on that is where the challenge is for all our entrepreneurs to make that paradigm shift, because it's really unlearning a lot of the old practices and embracing new ways of running and managing a business. Because if you don't do that, you're not able to scale. And one of the things I talk about, passionately about, is fueling growth by identifying metrics that matter. And so if you don't have key performance indicators in the business that's giving you leading signals or leading indications, you're probably going to make decisions slow or late that you might miss the market for whatever reason. So I would say it's not a liberty issue. It's more about embracing a different mindset about being data-driven. I'll just add one more comment on that I think when you do that, you also are then able to embrace a wider participation of people among your team down the line and the supporting community being advisors or your board of directors to give you really objectivity on the business case, because they too are looking at the data sets that you're providing and saying, here's how I interpret it. It might be different from how you interpret it. And so the collaboration on that, it'll be very productive. Thank you.
My name is Faraz Haroon. First of all, thank you very much for this opportunity to question you with our problems. I run a small coffee company. We are roasters, distributors of high quality, single origin coffees and distribute them all over Pakistan. My question to you, we've been operating in Pakistan for over almost 4 years. But this is a community which is sort of growing. So it becomes a little hard to find people who have the same interests as you, and to furthermore find people who can become co-founders and sort of partner up with you in this venture. My question to you is, how do we look for those co-founders? How do we find them in our marketplace?
So I think when I think about building a team, the first word that comes in is culture. And I think it's a case of not hiring to fill up seats, but basically attracting people or talent to a culture that you can demonstrate is compelling. So if your brand in the coffee business that you are in can differentiate itself from your competition, and the competition is doing, say, a very mediocre job in providing a service, either as a roaster or perhaps on the last mile of serving customers. And if I'm a prospect out there to be a co-founder, what would be the decision that I would be thinking about? Is it the compensation, or is it going to be the culture? And if as a co-founder, we talk about product market fit. There's also something called co-founder company fit. And that comes from the defined ethos and culture of the organization. It starts with you as a founder, of course. But as you attract talent, the key sustainable ingredient is going to be culture. And I would say that maybe that's something one has to look into seriously, even from day one of building a business.
So we'll take a last question up there.
My name is Mohsen, and I'm running a small software agency. We're providing services majorly in the cloud as well as the AI domain. My quick question is that, from whatever my experience has been since the past 3 years trying to maneuver around all of this, is that, people over here, they're phenomenally talented. They're like, there's no doubt about this. We are probably better than a lot of people around the world. But one thing which really kills you over here is the fact that at this age group, especially when you're young, what happens is that when you're shifting from, let's say, your university to further on to the job market, what happens is that a lot of times you want to do something, but the responsibilities, they come into play. Like you said, that what's most important is the team and the team and the team. But finding the right team who can actually support whatever you want to do, as well as manage their expenses at the same time, given the fact that most of us, we actually come from, not very, I'm not talking about this affair over here, but majorly if you talk about most of Pakistan, they do not come from like a very privileged background. So what I would do is that, I'd think about, do I want to work towards actually scaling a startup, or do I want to go for a job that actually makes me go to do my bare minimum? So how do you think, as someone who would want to actually make a team who can actually do what you want to do, which is obviously a lot bigger, requires a lot of vision, etc., etc., how do you think that should be dealt with?
Boy, that's a difficult question. I might just, pass the question back to one of your faculties here. Look, on a serious note, I think it's I've seen, unfortunately and sadly, great teams, people, but after 2 years, they just can't get a product out. They can't get funded. They can't get revenue. They just have to give up. For practical reasons, they have to support a young family. And that happens a lot, by the way. It's not an exception. And we as investors do take risks. We hope that doesn't happen, but we know there's a probability it does happen. So I often would question you is that how much are you willing to bet the farm, to go all in? Some people are prepared to do that. They're prepared to just go broke and do what it takes to get the product out. And if you think that's not worth it, because you're going to put your family at risk, then please don't do it, right? This is a life choice. It's not about a business. It's not about, entrepreneurship per se. It's about a life choice. And if you can get your head around that and say, look, this is going to be my life choice, I'm willing to go broke, then so be it. But it's a difficult question. Thank you.
Yes, Dr. Numan.
Thank you, Vijay. Noman Zafar, I'm the director of the incubation center here. So I wanted to take this opportunity to thank you and also request tied to a small question as well. I think it's a great opportunity if you can highlight, for example, you're running an accelerator, you're also an investor. Is it a single entry point, acceleration onto investment, or are there two different paths where you can do direct investment and also acceleration with investment leading to further investment? For the people who are here, that would be a great opportunity to hear how they can engage more with you. Leading on to that, for example, I assume that the acceleration may be a resident program, maybe a virtual program. And if you can highlight those aspects and the challenges that, for example, startups from Pakistan might have if they join an acceleration, which has an in-residence associated angle to it. Would that be, in your experience, a challenge, and how to overcome that challenge?
I really appreciate that question, Norman. Thank you for asking. if I may just indulge in a slightly broader explanation. So at Techstars, we are today investing about 600 to 700 companies annually. That will make us the world's largest or most active investor at pre-seed stage. And we do this exclusively through our accelerator program. So being part of a program is part of the investment deal. We get about 50, 60,000 applications. That means less than 2% of the applications that we receive are successful. So most of the programs have an emphasis on being present in the city. Some are hybrids, but the value of being on site is just mind-blowing. It's like being on the campus here with 50 people in a room, like-minded individuals. You meet investors, mentors coming in. It has a far more superior and enriching experience than being on Zoom, for example. But we do have the experience both ways. And part of the value that we bring to the table is the network. And so it's all about relationship building. So we have facilitated the connections for you to build those relationships, and then you take it on to become future mentors or investors. So yes, that's generally how we do it. It's easy. You don't need to know me. You can just go online, www.techstars.com. There's an application that you can drop down any of the programs around the world. It's all year-round applications that we take. But just know, as in case of Zoe, expect to fail the first couple times before you succeed, because it's hyper-competitive. Less than, I would say, close to 1% of people do get in. But we encourage you to apply multiple times because you're iterating each time you apply your product or your business. So we see evidence of that. That's a great signal for us to invest in. Yeah.
It sounds like the application process is also a test for the tenacity that you're looking for. So.
Yes, how patient you are.
If you don't mind, actually, if I can add just to this point, because I think it's really important for the community. The perseverance of actually applying a second time for anyone in most programs, even YC, when you apply to them, they'll always recommend, typically people who apply a second time have a higher chance of getting in. It's because on Vijay's first 3 tenets of successful companies, he also wants to see how far you're willing to go and stick together as founders. Because when I had the opportunity to finally ask Vijay near the end of the program, why did you take us in? And he laughed and he said, well, it sure wasn't your idea. I swear. We took it with a pinch of salt because, the truth is that in the first 2 weeks of the program, they ask you, are you ready to fundamentally shift the way that you do your business today? And most of the people in the room laughed. I guarantee you that at least 80% of them had at least some level of significant change, if not a complete change to their entire business model by the end of the program. And so I think that transformation is really reflective in the choices that they make.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Zohaib. And I think with that, Vijay, on behalf of NIC and everyone here, I would like to thank you for inspiring all of us to go through with this journey. So thank you once again.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure hearing your thoughts.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you very much.